Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives, and I'm very happy to bring back to our show Courtenay Turner. Courtney was with us last week, and we had a very engaging conversation. Which, right at the end of it, I was like, "Oh no, we have to stop," because you had just given me something that I did not know, and that was the connection between the Bernays family and Netflix. And of
Mhm.
course, I've looked into it a little bit more since then, but it's very, very interesting that you knew that. I don't know that. I've been looking at this stuff for 5 or 6 years now, and you have too, I'm sure, for some time. But it just shows you that we don't all have our arms around the whole big picture, and we have to help each other out. So anyway, I was lucky enough to get you to come back tonight to talk some
Awesome.
more about this issue of propaganda, Edward Bernays, and the sources of that. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I think there's a little bit of echo coming
an
back. Have you
echo. Oh
have you got
no.
me loud on
Let
you?
me see. Does that help anything?
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you still hear
That'd be
me?
better. Oh, now I
Yeah.
can't hear
Oh,
you.
yeah. You have to find a kind of a happy medium there.
Oh, geez.
One,
Um,
two.
hold on.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but are you still getting an echo?
No, it's gone.
Oh, it
It's
is.
yeah, it's good.
Okay. All right. Thank goodness. Yeah. All right. Good. Well, let me know if it comes back, and I'll have to bring my fiance in to help because the tech end of it is not my strong suit. So,
Okay, we're doing good. It sounds great.
okay. Good. Good. Great. Yeah,
So,
so no, I totally agree with that. Firstly, thank you so much for having me back. I really enjoyed the conversation last time, and what you're saying about us helping each other out, so true. I keep making the joke about how it took me so long to find the train station. Now I'm trying to find the high speed rail so I can catch up, because I really just started all of this, diving into all of this around 2021. So yeah, maybe a little bit in 2020, that's kind of when I started, but 2021 was really when I kind of went full steam ahead with this stuff. So, yeah, definitely a lot of catching up to do, I feel like.
well, it's good to have you back, and tell us a little bit about why you decided to dive into this stuff in 2021. We did cover it last week,
Mhm.
just for the benefit of everyone else. So the show that we did last week, we covered this, but give us a reminder.
I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. Essentially, I was in Santa Monica, California, and the measures there were pretty extreme. And the masks and the lockdowns were really, really challenging for me. For those who are not familiar with my story, I am visually and hearing impaired. So I actually do wear bilateral hearing aids, but I learned how to speak by reading lips because I didn't get hearing aids till I was almost 6 years old. I'm also blind in one eye. And so as a result, I have about 60% of the peripheral vision that somebody who sees by binocularly would have. So when I wear the mask, it further reduces my already limited peripheral vision. It also created all sorts of chalazions and problems in my sighted eye, and it made it incredibly challenging for me to communicate with people because I had not realized just how much I still depend on nonverbal cues for clarity of speech. Even though I wear the hearing aids now, I still depend largely on lip reading. So all that to say, the Cliff Notes version we went into, for those who are interested in hearing the longer, more long-winded version of the story, we can listen to the last time. I did go into more depth, but essentially the notion of doing a podcast was initially very terrifying to me until it dawned on me that it would be an opportunity, even if it was through a screen computer interface, to have naked face conversations. And I thought that that would just do wonders for my morale and, perhaps save my life. So yeah, here we are 2 years later. I decided to keep going. I initially really didn't even know if I would be airing those conversations. I just wanted to have meaningful discourse with people and see their faces while doing so. So, but I ended up really loving it, and I think other people are enjoying it as well, so I kept going.
And you dove into the psychological aspect of it, and I think. what we said at the beginning of the show reflects that you've gotten into it deeper than most people have. Where would you like to start with that?
Well, I will tell you a little bit from a personal perspective on just that. I was a philosophy major. I had a really strong background in psychology. My mom went back to school, became a psychologist when I was around 6 years old. And because I had I was very, very close to her because had such a medically challenging childhood. So I spent a lot of my childhood in and out of the hospital, and I spent a tremendous, inordinate amount of time with my mom, who is, still to this day one of my best friends, and we're very close. But as a result, I very much felt like I lost her. And so, because she couldn't spend the same amount of time with me. And so when she went back to school, I started reading Freud and reading Psychology Today and, her materials as a way of being able to communicate with her, because I knew she didn't have the same time for me that she previously had. So I, from a very, very young age, was really immersed in the field of psychology. And I had written 285-page theses in high school, two separate ones. I was very fortunate to have been given the leeway to pursue a lot of research projects in high school. I actually did an independent study on philosophy my junior year. I had done a independent kind of research in my English class my sophomore year, that my ninth grade, it was on Socrates, and my ninth grade, uh, my ninth grade history teacher actually published it. I didn't find that out till years later. So this was something I really had a strong background and interest in. And I had initially thought that I would go on and get my MD, PhD, and pursue the initial study that I had proposed. I proposed a study to Columbia Presbyterian, which is a hospital in New York City. They kind of laughed in my face. I was a junior in high school. I was 15 years old. We couldn't, as a junior, I was the first junior to ever do this program. My high school published it, and it was called the Focus program. And the seniors did this, where it was very much laid out the way a dissertation would be. The first semester was the review of the literature. Second semester was the field study. So because I was a junior and I was a little bit ahead because I had done some summer credits, but I still needed credits in order to meet graduation requirements, and therefore I could not drop classes my second semester of junior year in order to do the field study. But I got permission to take about 10 days off and go out to San Francisco to become certified in who then became my mentor. She was the founder of the Association for the Study of Dreams, and she had a method of dream analysis that was called the interview method. I became certified in her method, and I used that to conduct my research. So all this to say, I had presented a hypothesis that I wanted to test to Columbia Presbyterian. They laughed in my face. They told me it was a human brain study and that I would need an MD, PhD to conduct such a study. And that if I did, however, it would likely be statistically significant and I would likely get a Nobel Prize. So, of course, me being incredibly naive and flattered, I thought, oh, well, that's exactly what I'll do. And, I, in hindsight, of course, many years later, realized that that was them playing gatekeeper, because what they then proceeded to tell me was not to bother, because by the time I got those degrees, they would have already conducted the research. And thank you so much. And so I realized that in hindsight, it's kind of silly, because I'm not going to be the surgeon slicing people's brains, right? You don't need to be a coder in order to be the CEO of a software company, right? You would oversee the project. So it was my hypothesis that would be tested, and I would oversee the research. And there would have been neuro scientists and brain surgeons who would have conducted the physical end of the study. However, that's just kind of a hindsight is 2020, right? So, but all that to say, I was very much immersed in those fields, and I had quickly switched my major in college. In part, there were many reasons, but one of the things about diving into the field of psychology was that the further I went into psychology, the more I couldn't escape Marxism. And it was just so apparent how overwrought it was with Marxism and with Marxist indoctrination. And that was very frustrating to me. I felt like I would have to lie my way through the degree. And so I very quickly realized this, and I not so quickly endured until I ended up switching my major to philosophy, which I also had a pretty strong background in, as I did, a lot of my research projects in high school in philosophy. And as a very young kid, I was very interested in Greek mythology, which I think kind of laid the groundwork. And actually, I think it really has helped me to tie all of this together, because while I couldn't see it at those times, I think I had a clouded lens, and I did not have, the biases from the teachers that I was studying under definitely had an influence and clouded my perspective. However, I think those seeds have been planted. And because I did have a foundation, at least in the jargon and the terminology, then revisiting it after all these years and starting to see it with a different perspective really helped to connect dots that I hadn't been able to connect previously. Sorry, that was long-winded, but I thought that might be helpful to get a context of, why this was also interesting for me.
That is great, and, philosophy major, I was not. I did spend a good bit of time studying American political philosophy.
Mhm.
I was a government major, and I was,
Okay.
very interested in the philosophy behind, American government and
Sure,
why is it different from all the rest, and it's still a very important question.
sure.
Um, so let's get into the
Yeah.
issue of Tavistock, and,
Mhm.
another example, I mean, it was only 2 weeks ago that I was reading in a book, the book's called Ordo ab Teo by, David Livingstone,
Yeah.
and in this book, was where I first learned that, both, Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann were, like, board members of Tavistock, and it
Sure.
was their job to, fashion the American public opinion, in favor of World War One, and
Yep.
from there on out, we've been under the, psychological, you know, powers
Yes.
of these behind the scenes psychologists and wow,
Brainwashing
it's hard.
institute.
Yeah, it's hard for people to wrap their arms around the horror of it, but it's really is more than a century long disaster that we've been subjected to, as I understand it. Anyway, give
Yes.
us give us your perspective on it.
Yeah, definitely much longer than a century, but certainly, when we look at Tavistock, we can see some very concrete roots a little over a century ago. You talk about World War One. So interestingly enough, Tavistock was born out of the Wellington House in 1912, and it was actually created. They was known to be the British Propaganda Bureau, and it was created because Germany, they always do these things in the name of quote unquote defense. They have to compete with their supposed opponents. And Germany had a propaganda bureau. So it was under the guise that they needed to be able to compete with Germany. They created this British propaganda bureau that was also known as the Wellington House. And yes, they oversaw Woodrow Wilson, President Wilson, who ran on the campaign that he would never get us into war. That was because people were not sympathetic to war. They did not want to go to war, and they certainly did not want to get involved. The Americans, nor the British, actually wanted to get involved in World War One. And the Tavistock Institute was commissioned. Really, at the time, it was not called the Tavistock Institute. It was the British Propaganda Bureau, and it was commissioned to create the propaganda to garner the acquiescence for the British and American people to rally behind the sentiments of war. And one of the tactics that they used was to weaponize the term isolationist. So if you read George Washington's many of his speeches, he talks about how we should not meddle. You talked about American politics and what makes us different. One of the things that Washington really stressed was that we should not meddle in foreign affairs, and we should not let foreigners interfere in our politics. And these is just one of the things that he was very concerned about. People like to think that our founders were so prescient, and certainly I think they had a real handle on human nature and on geopolitics. But I think that it wasn't so much that they were prescient as it was that they were battling a lot of the same forces we are today, and they were trying to set things up to protect themselves and their progeny. But they did, so they weaponized this term isolationist. That was one of the jobs of the Tavistock, which at the time was the Wellington House. And that was the campaign that Wilson used, was that anybody who did not want to get into this war was an isolationist. Now, you'll hear that term repeated in more recent politics. We might remember Ron Paul. And this was a way of a lot of the people who were on the dissident right really rallied behind him. And I would say actually even a lot of the people on the political left who were more anti-establishment were in big favor of Ron Paul. And one of the ways that they were able to manipulate the populace against him was to dismiss his foreign policy and to say that he was an isolationist. And that was absolutely crazy, ludicrous. And this is why, we can't really take him seriously. So this was an old trope from the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. Which at the time was the Wellington House. And then it was around 1921 when they started to investigate into shell shock therapy research, which becomes very, very significant for trauma-based mind control. And the name Tavistock is where it was centered. It was in, the Tavistock, that was where it was physically located, but it was also the Marquis of Tavistock, the Russell, who was from the Russell family, who donated the building, the specific building designated for the shell shock therapy research. And that was in 1921. Interestingly enough, his great grandfather was the founder of Skull and Bones.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, when you start to look into a lot of these players, there are a lot of secret society and occult ties, not just in their ideologies and worldviews, but actually specifically concrete. As you can see from the Russell family, this was directly connected to Skull and Bones. So that was in 1921. Later, it didn't become the actual Tavistock Institute of Human Relations until 1948, which I think is just very interesting timing in terms of the players that were involved around that time, right? When the UN was having their meetings, what else was there? UNESCO. There was a bunch of things that were happening right around 1947, 1948, but they were all kind of. I think that the WHO had a major a document around that time. I'll have to look up some of the others, but there were a lot of things that were happening around 1947, 1948 that were advancing this global governance agenda. So
The National Security Act of 1947, of course, which
that's right.
creates the CIA and unifies the military services under one command at the Pentagon. That of course,
Lewin was involved. Yeah, he was involved in the actual creation of the OSS, which then became the CIA. Yeah.
Who are you speaking of?
Kurt Lewin, who was one of the forerunners of the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations.
Okay.
The psychologist Kurt Lewin. Yep.
And he was OSS?
He helped to create the OSS. He helped to start the OSS.
Okay.
Yeah. So
another name I'm not that familiar with. So, but that, of course, 1948, and you've got Truman, and you've got the Dulles brothers coming into their greatest decade of power. So it all does fit together.
Dulles, who became the first director of Allen Dulles, became the first director of the CIA. Yeah.
So, what is the purpose of? Well, let's go back.
Sorry, yeah, I went through a whole bunch of
I wanted to tie together kind of through the history of it from Freud to Bernays, and then into the Tavistock, and then to where I guess I would like to ultimately get to the connection to Netflix, and what does that mean for America and the world that we're all watching Netflix all the time.
Right. Well, yeah. So Freud was a huge influence over the Tavistock Institute. The Tavistock Institute was trying to kind of codify and legitimize this field that had very recently emerged. So social science had not been around much longer than maybe I think the mid 1800s is really kind of when a lot of these social sciences started to crop up. And they were funded by the same typical players that you would expect, and the same players who were involved in the Tavistock Institute. So people like the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Milners. I don't know if Rhodes specifically was involved in Tavistock, but he was definitely involved in social science development, the Crown, the Fabian Socialists, the Fabian Society. The Frankfurt School has a lot of ties to Tavistock. There's a lot of connections between Tavistock and Fabian Society with Tavistock. A lot of overlap between the people who were involved in both, and a lot of training under Tavistock. So what else was it? Oh, so Freud, who was the double uncle of Edward Bernays, who wrote the propaganda book. And Edward Bernays took a lot of his tactics and belief systems and the metrics for psychology and propaganda from his uncle Freud, who was very heavily influenced by Freud. And so were a lot of these other psychologists who were involved in, like Rawlings Rees, who was one of the forerunners, Kurt Lewin, Eric Fromm. They were all very much influenced by each other and drawing from Freud. So, the predominant psychologists at that time, Freud and Jung, and while they had some nuanced kind of differences, there was a lot of overlap, and really then the people under them really drew from both. So you see those influence from both of them very heavily in the advancing of the tactics that the Tavistock Institute created and then used. So Edward Bernays was the double nephew, and then you were talking about the connection to. I'll just very quickly mention it's Mark Randolph Bernays, who is then his nephew, and he is one of the founders of Netflix. But Edward Bernays was advised, through the Tavistock Institute to create propaganda for the United States, and we see all those commercials where they would make things like smoking really sexy and appealing, and that it's good for you. We saw all those ads with the doctor smoking, and they claim that they didn't know at the time, but that we have lots of evidence to indicate that that's not actually true. They did know, and this was propaganda. One of the key objectives of the propaganda of the Tavistock Institute was to tear down women. And I think they were largely successful at this, and they wanted to do it because they wanted to destroy the family. And they knew this. So this was a continuation of the feminist agenda. And the feminist agenda, contrary to what a lot of people think, it was not about empowering women. It was about destroying the family, and ultimately it was about destroying humanity. It does stem from some of the older, more occult types of and pagan worship beliefs, where they worship these hermaphroditic type of beings and entities, and you see that today. And this is so it's ironic, but not really. It actually makes perfect sense. But it's ironic if you don't know the history, that really Tavistock was almost unheard of, especially in the United States, until about 2 years ago, when they had that whole scandal, which became a lawsuit over the transgender issue, because they were being accused of pushing these children to have these puberty blockers and surgeries without consent, without informing the parents, forget consent. And but interestingly enough, the history, that they had to destroy women in order to get to where they're at today. You couldn't get to transgenderism. Ultimately, I don't believe you could get to transhumanism, which is, I think, their real goal, without the feminist movement. And so one of the things that they had to do was to destroy Christianity and Western civilization, Western culture, because they knew that was a bastion of freedom, and that Christianity in particular was one of the things that really elevated women in society, and they needed to tear that down in order to bring women down and to destroy the family. That's really what it was about. It's really about destroying the family, because if you destroy the family, you have much more control over the masses. So So a lot of the propaganda was targeted towards that. And even war propaganda, if you think about it, because what happens in war, you have all these men go off, right? And then the women are left, and they can tell them, oh, well, this is so empowering. You can go to work in the factory, wherever. And they gave them the opportunity to be able to sell these narratives to women, because now they were desperate and they were in a position where they had to. But it was that was part of their plans all along, and it's very well documented. So
Yeah, I was talking with David Underdown yesterday, and about Gloria Steinem, and
Mhm.
pointing out her relationship with Henry Kissinger, which she kind of tends to try to deny, but
Right.
it's a clear line from Kissinger to Gloria Steinem to Ms. Magazine to the what you're talking about, and
Yep.
I would say most of the women in America would probably object to what you said and say, no, no, that I got free. I'm free now. I don't have the shackles of housework, and but what way you put it is consistent with kind of a what people think of as an older or almost an antique version of family life, and that is where the woman is put up on a pedestal,
Mhm.
and is really practically worshipped, and the idea of all of the courtesies and opening the door and all that stuff. Well, that
Well,
that package of elevation of the woman above normal humanity has is really been driven into the underground, and you're voicing a movement to bring it back, I guess.
I'm absolutely. I actually just started a show. We did our first live stream on it. I've shot a couple of episodes prior to that one, but this is the first time we've aired, and we went live. And it's called The Right Voices. It's a female roundtable discussion. We actually did our first episode on feminism, and we exposed a lot of the lies behind the movement. And yeah, so I highly recommend, if you haven't seen it, if anybody's interested in the topic. We had a guest appearance. Our guest host was Rachel Wilson, who's written a book on the occult roots of feminism. So I think it was a really interesting discussion. But I just wanted to address something you said about the elevation of women. It's not because women are somehow superior or they're like above, men. And it's that they bear life and they are essential for life. But humans are essential for life, but they recognize that women are carrying children, right? They're the ones that give birth. And so it's really about the value of life. And I think that's kind of one of the cornerstones between people like the people who run, created and, are involved in the Tavistock Institute, a lot of the foundings of the field of psychology itself, the field of social sciences. Most of them are rooted in eugenics. They don't value life. So that's kind of the major juxtaposition between the two worldviews. Is one is a valuing life, and the other one wants to be in a trance then post-human world where they ultimately believe they will become God. This is why you've all know Harari's book is Homo Deus, because it's man God. And they think that they will supersede, he says himself, they will supersede the biblical God, because the biblical God is only capable of creating organic life, and they will create inorganic life, and therefore they will surpass the biblical God. And that's really what it is. They think that they will have the opportunity, because they don't think that they will have eternal glory, and therefore they're looking to have reign on earth for as long as possible, and they want full control over humanity, and they think that they're going to create this technology where they can live forever. And that's kind of, really the big difference between the two worldviews. So
Yeah, it is. I'm kind of speechless, because it's once again, it's impossible for people who are just hearing this for the first time to grasp onto it, and it's very
mm,
difficult material.
mhm,
I know, so many of my friends who are liberals are
mhm,
very much into feminism, and uh,
mhm.
the idea of freedom is important, and that anybody should have choices in life,
Sure.
people that are restricted from doing what they want to do just because of their sex. I think that's, to restrict them and say no, I think is problematic for me. However, to protect the givers of life from the toil and stress of having a day job, the stress of having to manage raising kids while you're making money at the same time, and I can just imagine, it happens all the time, and it's gotten, the one parent family, the latchkey kid, the famous latchkey kids of the 70s and 80s. And it's, now they've turned it, everything is turned over to your iPhone and your devices, and the kids are looking at them all the time for babysitting purposes instead of out in the fresh air running around. Okay, stop, John.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was just going to add to that when you talk about I absolutely agree. I think that we should have freedom, and in no way are women being told that we should go backwards and that their place is only in the kitchen, they can't work. That's absolutely not what we're saying. However, I think it's worth noting that this whole notion of needing to have a two-person income to support the family was engineered and largely by the Tavistock Institute. Actually, they created a lot of propaganda to get us into the 16th Amendment, which became the income tax amendment, right? That there's nothing in the Constitution that suggests this. It's a completely, for lack of a better, I would actually argue it's a Marxist type of doctrine that is behind it. But it was definitely not in the Constitution initially. I don't, there's actually even evidence to stipulate that it wasn't even, legally ratified. But that is speculation, but there is some significant evidence to support it. However, I will also say that the Federal Reserve the Tavistock Institute was very instrumental in a lot of the propaganda behind that as well. I mean, most people who know the story behind the Federal Reserve know that it is neither federal nor do they have any reserves. They're not, a bank in the way that we think of a bank. They are a very private entity. It was literally a conspiracy that was held on Jekyll Island, and it was a conspiracy amongst the elites to essentially steal money from the masses, and that they were very successful at it. But Tavistock and other propaganda bureaus were very instrumental in creating the propaganda in order to corral the masses to buy into the lie that is the fiat currency system. If we didn't buy the lie, it wouldn't work. And it is completely a lie. There's nothing that backs it. At that time, at least it was backed by gold, but it was still a complete Ponzi scheme. And it was very fraudulent. But now at this time, and of course, it was Kissinger who took us off the gold standard, right? With under Nixon.
Yeah, George Schultz.
1971. Yeah.
George P. Schultz in August of 1971,
Mhm.
and all that, it's just denuding America of our wealth. It's
Yeah.
it's like after World War II,
And humanity of their freedom.
and yeah, but in terms of America, this incredible fraud that's been perpetrated on us from the consumer revolution of the 50s, where instead of washing your clothes with your own muscle power, you now have a machine that does it for you, and
Mhm.
you have to buy that machine, and then you have to get the latest Chevrolets to see the USA, and
Right.
you about get that 30-year mortgage on that tract house in the Cloverleaf development. And the next thing you know, you're scrambling to make it because you've got so many obligations, and you're on that track for 30 years.
Mhm.
That is, and all of it, the mortgage itself, whatever the percentage is, it's a huge gift to the banks
Oh, yeah.
because they're getting more interest than the principal in most mortgage situations over
Totally.
time. And while they're making money off of that, the dollar itself is getting devalued. So you're getting hit both that way. And then, of course, the other point that you make is when women enter the workforce, then the tax base doubles because you get
Yep.
twice as many workers, and they work for lower money because with more people chasing the same jobs, the wages never go up. And
Exactly.
and that stagnation has been real,
Oh,
and people's pensions have disappeared when pension funds have gone belly up, and the unions have gotten uh, uh, well, let's just say converted into uh, somewhat criminal organizations, and the people don't have a chance, uh, but they are under this um, psychological manipulation that makes it look like we're doing good. Like,
right.
I mean, now one of the psychologists is B.F. Skinner,
Hmm.
who is quoted as saying that he found out, or it's psychological fact, that you can control people better with positive reinforcement than
That
you can
rather
with
than
negative
negative. Yeah.
reinforcement. And so to me, that tells me that's why they're giving us all these great new devices all the time. And my camera keeps getting better on my phone, and I can make these, well, I can do what we're doing right now. I mean, this is fabulous. I love this technology. But
Hmm.
they give it to us, but what are they taking away from us? They're taking away the real value. I've got digits, I've got a computer, I've got electronic devices all over the place. But
Right.
where do I have a roll of gold coins in the back? No. And
Right.
do I have a bunch of money stored up? No. Most people have been losing money since this pandemic, and it's not coming back. That seems to be part of the plan too, to just denude us of our personal wealth as well as the resource.
Well, the plan is the transhuman plan. So their plan is to roll us into these digital currencies, central bank digital currency, and have full control. Where I think China is the technocratic model for what they want to execute throughout the world, and that's where they regulated all of the other digital currencies out, and you can only use their federal. I think it's going to be the central bank digital currency ultimately. Biden did issue Executive Order 14067 back on March 9th of 2022, and then it went into effect December 15th of 2022. So that was to do all of the research necessary to implement these digital currencies. And people argue, well, it's just research, but when have you seen research is not cheap. When have you seen them just spend an exorbitant amount of money and funds and resources on research that they didn't really plan to execute if they could? I'm not saying that they will, because I'm hoping there's going to be enough pushback and there'll be a best laid plans of mice and men. But I do think that those are their plans. We've seen the model that's been rolled out with the social credit score, and they ultimately want a UBI with the social attached to a social credit that is a caste system stratified for and that's controlled through your central bank digital currency. And Klaus Schwab has talked about this and make it pretty clear that that's where they want to go with all of it. So then they'll have the ultimate control because they already have the technology in place for both mind control as well as brain control. And they are different. I do think one of the reasons I think Tavistock is so important and the shell shock therapy research is so important to understand is because it laid the groundwork for things like MK Ultra, which is really weaponized trauma-based mind control. They instituted things like you said you were you studied government philosophy, so like political science. The Tavistock Institute actually created polling, and contrary to what people think, that it's about getting a measurement and assessment of what public opinion is. They actually initially didn't call it polling or what they called it was manufacturing consent, and that's actually what it is. It is you take the poll in order to be able to know how to manipulate the data. Right, I'm blanking on who it was, but the actual founder of statistics was an open, avowed occultist, and talked about using it to manipulate. It was never intended to be something to verify and to prove. And I personally had to teach myself statistics when I was in high school to learn to do my research project because, as a junior, I hadn't taken statistics. So it was something I had to teach myself outside of school in order to be able to conduct my research. And one of the things I learned very quickly was this is really easy to manipulate. If I have we all have confirmation biases, right? Like we all want to seek out the answers to things that we think are aligned with what we believe. And of course, I had a thesis that I wanted to prove, and this is not. There was nothing nefarious about that. It wasn't any malicious intent, right? I had a thesis. I was excited about it. I wanted to find evidence to substantiate it, and what I found pretty quickly was that through statistics, it would be really easy to manipulate if I wanted to do so. I am a pretty honest person, and it's certainly at that time I was probably too afraid of getting in some sort of trouble that I certainly didn't do that. But knowing that, because I had to teach myself statistics and I didn't have, an outsider, uh, you know, framing the knowledge, it was really easy to see. It was just very clear. So yeah, so all of these kinds of things, I think they all come together. They're really socially engineering the masses. Tavistock is such a monster. I call it the mother of all think tanks. I could talk about Tavistock probably for like 6 hours. But yeah, so those are some of the key things I wanted to address.
Yeah,
But
and I noticed on your Twitter today you published a copy of a page. I think it was from is John Coleman? Is that the author's name? The
Dr.
300.
John Coleman, he wrote a book on Tavistock. It retails on Amazon for almost $5,000. I've
I
read the
know.
PDF,
I saw
however.
it recently. Yeah, but
Yeah.
but you can get it on Internet Archive, I think.
So I have it actually. I have the PDF linked in my Telegram chat. It's really the only place I could link it, because of the internet censorship. But I have the PDF link there, and I've read it several times. He's a phenomenal resource. Dr. John Coleman has written 13 books. I'm actually going to be doing a podcast on his book, The Committee of 300, with Jay Dyer and Jamie Hanshaw. I believe it's next week. He's written 13 books. However, one of the other really good books that he's written that I think is very underrated, very few people know about it, is Diplomacy by Deception. And he talks in that book about a lot of the wars and the propaganda and the really just the complete obfuscation of the Constitution and manipulation to be able to engage in these wars and the lies that have been sold under the guise of peace in order to fight these wars. So that's a really great one. But Dr. John Coleman is fascinating because he was a former MI6. And, one of the big criticisms he gets is that his books don't have a whole lot of citations. So if you've read them, it kind of reads more like somebody giving a speech and then just writing out like stream of consciousness. And while certainly I would never tell anybody to take anything as face value, because even the most brilliant, most expertised of people and most thorough researchers, they're humans, and they can certainly make mistakes. But what I would urge people to understand is that because he was intelligence, he was former intelligence, he has access to a lot of private libraries. And what happens when you go into these private libraries, and I know this from friends who are either in intelligence or were in intelligence, what happens is you get permission to go into these libraries that the mainstream would not have access to. However, you can take notes, but you can't take the books out. You can't take pictures. You can't take them with you. So you can take notes, but when you leave those doors, they will go through your notes with a fine-tooth comb, and they will redact what they do not want you to have. So they might actually ink out some of your notes. And therefore, as a result of that, a lot of what he shared was from memory. And that is partly why, again, this is not to justify errors that may be there or to say that, he, to take everything he says as face value. But I do think it's an important note to make. I personally like his reading for that reason, because it does feel like somebody sharing a story. I think it's it reads well, but he is fascinating. He covers a lot of ground. He really dug deep on material that a lot of people, I mean, I think prior to him, most people had never even heard of the Tavistock Institute outside of those really in the UK who were close to it or had some, interaction with it directly.
Well, let's talk about television and the media generally, and
Yep.
not specifically Netflix unless you want to, but the whole idea of the mass media being under control, and that control is consistent entirely with the goals of the Tavistock Institute. Um, People watch television all the time, and of course we have different things now like Hulu and other stuff that people watch, but the content, what
Mhm.
what is the what is the relationship between the studies you've done and what people are seeing on television? Is there a direct connection there?
I would say absolutely. And I would also say that this is not new. We can go all the way back to the ancient Greeks. They used theater and sports as a means of propaganda. And we definitely see with the Tavistock Institute, I believe it was one of their very first meetings. I'm going to have to pull out my notes, but they had a meeting with, and it was all sorts of playwrights that you would recognize. I'm going to blank on who it was, but hang on. Uh,
Edward
yeah.
Albee.
What?
I was guessing Edward Albee.
Uh, I don't know if he was, but it was definitely Chesterton, William Archer, Rudyard Kipling, H.G. Wells, Arnold Bennett. There were 25 of them, 25 authors. So prior to television and film, a lot of this type of propaganda was done through plays, theater, music, stage music, obviously, since they didn't have necessarily the technology that we have today with the highly synthesized type music and recording studios. But it was also done through writing, through plays, and through literature. And
What's
we
interesting,
certainly see that with like H.G. Wells, with all the predictive programming he did. We saw it with Brave New World and Orwell, right, 1984. So I think that this has kind of been a common theme throughout history, but certainly Tavistock oversaw. They were very instrumental in a lot of culture creation. A lot of people know about the 60s with the LSD testing that they were doing, but that they used the Grateful Dead in order to popularize these psychedelic drugs. And the direct connection there was the producer for the Grateful Dead was Alan Trist. He was the son of Eric Trist. Eric Trist was one of the psychologists who were the forerunners for the Tavistock Institute. So there was a direct connection there. But of course, there was, all those doctors like Timothy Leary and Gottlieb, who, of course, became MK Ultra doctors as well. And they were very involved in this culture creation through the music of the time and the arts of the time. They use things like people don't realize, like, even just like pop art was used as a Cold War psyop.
yeah.
um yeah, so what I think is happening, today, it's gotten progressive. It's gotten much more bold and in your face. Someone said, I love the Grateful Dead. I did too. I think someone was telling me, and I loved like 90s music, and someone was saying how it was all psyop. And I was like, don't take away my psyop. Like, I mean, I really enjoyed the music, but I'm very aware through the research of what the intentions behind it were. It definitely was to socially engineer the masses. But what we're seeing today is a lot more of like what they would call revelation of the method. So they're showing their hand, and you can see things become much more overt. So whereas in a few decades ago, in the movies and art and television and music, you may have seen more subliminal messaging of where they want to go with a lot of this the ultimate agenda. And that, you could see some of these you know for instance, the trans stuff, you could see that being pushed subliminally, but it wasn't necessarily in your face. Whereas now it's in, almost every television show or movie that you watch. And now you see things like the Grammys. It's that you can't deny that that was pretty overtly satanic in their messaging. But it's not that it wasn't before. It's that now they're much more in your face.
Yeah, and that's a very good example. And yeah, okay, that pretty much ties together what I wanted to cover tonight, and it's very that was a sweeping. And now I had a little bit of a wait a minute moment when you said Rudyard Kipling, and
I know.
was he
That was
actually?
a hard one for
No,
me. Well,
no, I
he was also under the Rhodes Milner, right? You know, Cecil Rhodes Milner, very much. He was under that whole umbrella to, but which is tied into Tavistock. I mean, prior to Tavistock, you had the British Psychological Society.
uh-huh.
These people were all invested in the rise of the Anglo-American establishment, which is really trying to basically bring us back under the British Empire. They want to regain the control. But I think where people mistake this, because this is a whole nother this could be another few hours to dive into all of this and really unfold it and do justice to it. But I think where I don't want people to misconstrue me, because it is collective. They work together. So there's a coordination of these worldwide intelligence apparatus that work in conjunction with the secret societies, with the academic institutions, with these think tanks. So, for instance, Tavistock works very closely with the military-industrial complex. That does not mean just in the United States. That means all over the world. They work with the MI6. They work with Mossad. They are the pretty much the parent company to organizations like the Stanford Research Institute, or to the RAND, Research and Development, in Santa Monica, California. RAND is very largely involved in warfare research. Tavistock oversees them. I always think of them as like the mother of these think tanks. And they do all of this type of research. And oftentimes it's under the guise of defense, because when it's in the guise of defense, you can get a black ops carte blanche budget to do whatever you want. And they don't have to reveal the intricacies and the nuances of what's actually being done. And then they have the luxury, if they choose, to weaponize against the masses, as opposed to the supposed opponents that they've sold the propaganda around.
Well, before we go, I wanted to mention one thing that I learned this morning from an interview with Riley Wagaman
Okay.
in Tbilisi, Georgia, and he's a correspondent, American correspondent that reports generally from Moscow, and uh, he says that on April the 1st, Russia will be instituting a central bank digital currency. Uh, it's going to start right there in Russia on April the 1st. And I think that tells us, this stuff is ahead of America in Russia. It's ahead of America in China. As you said
Mhm.
before, the technological uh, uh, nightmare, the panopticon of technology is being imposed all around the world. And another thing that I think we all agree on is that, without America, there's just not any hope.
Right, right. That is my my pinned tweet, right? I talk about us being the beekeepers, and I think that it is incumbent upon the people of America to be the preservers of the free will of humanity. Because when America falls, the world will follow. So, not that the government, it's the people. Really, is the people. So, yeah. I'm sorry. I feel like I spoke so much, and I don't even know that I covered all that much, but there's so much in it. It is really it's a deep, deep rabbit trail to untangle, but I think it's an important one. So
Well, I've learned a lot tonight, and
yeah,
I think this has just been exactly what I wanted to do, was to get
okay,
your
good.
perspective and your experience in studying these matters, and share it with our general audience and my usual viewers.
Yeah.
They're very happy to have you, be part of the action here at McDuff Lives. Thank you, Courtenay Turner, for being with us. By the way, Turner, of course, German word for people who do acrobatics. And I thought that's very interesting that your name is Turner. And you might not know that, but there's old societies called Turner Vereins. A Verein is a German word for society, and Turner is what the name which the athletes, the gymnasts. And there was a great tradition of building these great big jungle gym type things that people would climb up on and do their exercises. And 19th century rich tradition of the Turner Vereins in from Germany and then come over here to America. You might enjoy exploring that idea. It's so consistent with what you do.
That's fascinating. Oh, you're
Yeah, Turner Verein with a Verein, and you'll enjoy exploring that. It's kind of amazing that that is your last name, and that has been your profession. That's one thing that we didn't mention tonight is that Courtenay Turner is actually an aerial artist. Is that the way I should put
Yeah,
it?
aerial artist, aerial acrobatic artist. Yeah. And if anybody wants to see me do aerial acrobatic arts or aerial arts, whatever you want to call it, I do say aerial arts, but sometimes I add the acrobatic just in case people don't understand what aerial arts are. But I will be doing a huge event June 3rd and 4th. The lineup is incredible. It is not done, but you can go to Rebels for Cause, spelled out. So, like Rebels, FOR, Cause, CAUSE. Cause stands for Creative Artists Uniting for the Sovereignty of Everyone. And we're combining lots of artistic performances, music acts, comedians. I will be doing aerial and lots of speakers and panelists. And that's going to be in Nashville, June 3rd and 4th. So go to the website, check it out. And if you're in the area or you can be in the area, definitely come. We'd love to have you.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure again, and look forward to seeing you again sometime, Courtenay. Thank you very much. And
Like,
everybody, thanks for being with us. Good night, everyone.
likewise. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay. Bye bye now.
Bye.